What would you do if a quiet girl suddenly collapsed during a village festival? And when she stood up again, a terrifying voice began revealing secrets no one was supposed to know.
Hi besties, welcome back to Tales by Steph, a home of interesting African stories. Sit back and enjoy today's story.
The first drumbeat came before sunset. It rolled across the village like distant thunder waking the earth. The sound was deep and heavy, the kind that made people's hearts beat faster. Children ran out of their houses barefoot, laughing and shouting. Women hurried to the village square carrying trays of roasted yam and calabashes of palm wine. Men dragged wooden stools and lit lanterns around the open space. Everyone knew what tonight meant. It was the night of the Shrine Festival, the night the whole village gathered to honor the ancient deity that protected their land. Old people said the spirit of the shrine had watched over the village for generations. It protected them from enemies, healed sickness, and punished those who did evil. But people also whispered something else about the deity. They said it could see every secret hidden in a human heart. And when the spirit was angry, it did not stay silent. In the middle of the square, a large fire burned beside the sacred shrine. The smell of burning herbs mixed with the sweet smell of palm wine. Dancers wearing raffia skirts and carved masks circled the fire while the drummers beat their instruments harder. Sparks flew into the darkening sky as the crowd clapped and sang. Some people laughed loudly, others danced until sweat covered their bodies. The night was full of life. But standing far behind the crowd, near a broken wooden fence, was a girl who did not dance. Her name was Nkem. Nkem was 16 years old. She was quiet, always quiet. Her dark eyes were calm, and she rarely spoke unless someone asked her a question. Many people in the village hardly noticed her. Some even called her strange because she liked to stay alone. While other girls enjoyed festivals, Nkem usually watched from the corner like a shadow that did not belong. That night she stood quietly, folding her hands together while watching the dancers spin around the shrine fire. The flames reflected in her eyes as the drums echoed across the village. But inside her chest something felt strange, a small, uneasy feeling that she could not explain. The crowd grew larger as the night became darker. The chief priest, an old man named Okorie, slowly walked toward the shrine. His body was painted with white chalk, and feathers hung from his arms and neck. In his hand he carried a long wooden staff covered with cowries. When the villagers saw him step forward, the drums slowly began to slow down. The singing faded. One by one, people stopped talking. Soon the entire square became quiet. The priest lifted his staff high above his head and faced the shrine. "My people," he said loudly, his voice carrying through the silent square. "Tonight we gather to honor the spirit that protects our land." The villagers murmured softly in agreement. The priest continued, "The spirit that sees all things." The crowd responded again, "Yes." "The spirit that punishes evil." "Yes." "The spirit that blesses the good." "Yes." The priest began chanting ancient words passed down from their ancestors. The drums slowly joined the chant again. The dancers returned to the fire, spinning faster now, their raffia skirts swishing through the air. Women began clapping rhythmically while the men stomped their feet on the earth. Smoke from burning herbs rose toward the sky. The priest suddenly raised a calabash filled with palm wine and poured it on the ground before the shrine. "Great Spirit of our land," he cried loudly, "come and accept our offering." The crowd shouted with excitement. But at that moment something strange happened. A sudden cold wind rushed across the square. It was not strong, but it made the fire shake violently. The dancers paused for a second. Some people turned their heads, confused. The wind stopped as quickly as it came. The drums continued. The dancing continued. But Nkem suddenly felt dizzy. Her heart started beating faster. But this time it was not the drums. It was her heart. The sounds around her became distant, very distant, like she was hearing them from the bottom of a deep river. Her vision blurred. The lights around the square stretched and twisted. She tried to step backward. Her legs refused to move. The uneasy feeling inside her chest suddenly became heavy. Her body shook. Then suddenly Inkem collapsed to the ground. Her body hit the dry earth with a dull sound. People near the fence screamed. Someone fainted. Bring water. What happened? Women rushed toward her. Men pushed through the crowd, trying to see what was going on. From the other side of the square, her father, Obina, ran toward the noise. Nkem, he shouted. But before anyone could reach her, her body suddenly jerked. Once, twice, then slowly. She stood up, but something about her was wrong. Her eyes were open, but they looked empty, like someone else was staring through them. Her body moved slowly toward the center of the square. The crowd stepped back in fear without anyone telling them to move. Something in the air felt heavy. Even the drummers slowly stopped playing. Silence covered the entire square. The chief priest stared at the girl with wide eyes. The fire crackled softly beside the shrine. Then Nkem opened her mouth. But the voice that came out was not hers. It was deep, ancient, powerful. My children, the crowd gasped loudly. Some women screamed. Others covered their mouths in shock. The voice continued slowly. You called, and I have come. The chief priest dropped his staff. His hands trembled. The deity, he whispered. Instantly the villagers fell to their knees. Even the elders bowed their heads. Nobody doubted what was happening. The village deity had possessed the girl. Nkem's head slowly turned toward the crowd. Her eyes glowed faintly in the firelight. You celebrate tonight, the voice said slowly, but your hearts are full of darkness. Fear spread through the villagers like cold water. No one spoke. No one moved. You lie to each other. The voice became louder. You cheat one another. The wind began blowing softly again. You hide terrible things inside your hearts. Some people began trembling. Do you think I cannot see? The spirit suddenly turned toward the front of the crowd. A man standing there began shaking violently. He was Chief Maduka, the most powerful man in the village. The voice spoke again. You stand before your people pretending to be honorable. The chief's face turned pale. Sweat covered his forehead. But you murdered your own brother. Gasps exploded across the square. Women began whispering loudly. Men looked at each other in shock. The chief stumbled backward. You poisoned him during the harvest feast, the voice continued calmly. The chief collapsed to his knees. His hands trembled. I... But the words refused to come out. His secret was now standing naked before the entire village. The spirit spoke again. Your crime is no longer hidden. The chief lowered his head and began crying. But the spirit was not finished. The voice slowly echoed across the silent square. And you, trader of charms, come forward. A wealthy trader standing in the crowd suddenly froze in fear. His secret was about to be revealed next. And the villagers slowly began to realize something terrifying. This night was not a celebration anymore. It was a night of judgment. And before the spirit left the girl's body, every hidden crime in the village would be exposed. Everyone turned toward him. It was Okafor, the wealthy trader. Okafor owned one of the biggest provision shops in the village. His shop was always full of customers buying rice, salt, palm oil, and dried fish. People believed he was simply a lucky and hard-working man. But now his face had turned pale with fear. His eyes moved quickly around the crowd. He slowly tried to hide behind the people standing near him. But the villagers quickly moved away. No one wanted to stand beside a man the spirit had called. Nkem's strange glowing eyes locked on him. You hide wickedness behind your smiling face. Okafor's legs began shaking. The spirit continued slowly. You walk into the shops of other traders when the night is dark. A confused murmur spread through the crowd. Many traders in the village had complained for years that their shops suddenly stopped getting customers. Some even closed their businesses because nobody came to buy from them anymore. The spirit's voice became louder. You bury dark charms inside their shops. Loud gasps filled the square. Several traders stared at Okafor with wide eyes. You bury the charms, so their customers will disappear. The villagers murmured loudly now. The voice thundered again. And those customers are drawn to your shop instead, a woman shouted from the crowd. That is why my shop has been empty. Another trader pointed angrily at Okafor. My customers stopped coming 2 years ago. Okafor suddenly dropped to his knees. Sweat poured down his face. His lips trembled badly. Mercy. Please, he whispered weakly. But the spirit ignored him. Nkem slowly turned her head again. The wind blew harder, and the shrine fire danced wildly. Her glowing eyes searched the crowd again. You, elder who pretends to protect the weak. A tall old man standing near the Iroko tree froze immediately. It was Elder Chinedu, one of the most respected men in the village. People always came to him when they needed wisdom or help settling disputes. But now the old man's walking stick trembled in his hands. The spirit's voice echoed across the square. You steal land from widows. The crowd gasped loudly again. Women covered their mouths in shock. You threaten them until they abandon their farms. The old man slowly collapsed to the ground. His breathing became fast and uneven. Please, forgive me, he whispered weakly. But the spirit did not stop. Nkem's body slowly turned again. The fire crackled loudly beside the shrine. Her voice became deeper. You believe your secrets are buried? The wind passed through the square again. But nothing hides from the spirit of this land. The villagers were trembling now. Some lowered their heads in fear. Others stared nervously at the ground, afraid the spirit might call their names next. Suddenly, Nkem's glowing eyes stopped on a young man standing near the back of the crowd. His face instantly turned pale. You. The young man began shaking violently. You stole the inheritance of your brother after his death. A woman suddenly screamed from the crowd and rushed forward crying. That is my husband's brother. The young man fell to the ground immediately, covering his face with his hands. The square exploded with whispers and frightened voices. The spirit had exposed another secret, and another, and another. One by one, the hidden sins of the village came into the open. A man who secretly poisoned his neighbor's goat. A woman who paid a witch doctor to curse her rival. A hunter who lied about how his friend died in the forest. Each secret fell into the square like heavy stones. Fear spread across the villagers because the spirit seemed to see everything. Every hidden crime. Every dark secret. Suddenly, Nkem's body began shaking. Her arms stretched outward slowly. The wind became stronger, and the shrine fire rose higher into the air. The spirit's voice thundered across the square. Enough! Instantly, silence returned. The villagers were breathing heavily now. Their hearts pounded loudly inside their chests. Then the voice became slow again. You wonder why I chose this girl. People slowly lifted their heads. Many eyes turned toward Obina, Nkem's father. He stood among the villagers like a statue. Sweat covered his face and his breathing had become fast. The spirit spoke again. You wonder why I entered her body? Obina's legs began trembling. The chief priest stared at him carefully. The voice became colder. "I chose her because her blood carries an old betrayal." A loud gasp spread across the crowd. The wind moved through the square again. The spirit continued. "Her father broke the sacred oath of this shrine." Obina's eyes widened in terror. The villagers began whispering loudly. The spirit's voice echoed again. "Many years ago, he stole from the shrine." The chief priest suddenly stepped backward in shock. His hands began shaking. The voice grew darker. "He took what belonged to the spirit." Obina's knees suddenly gave way. He collapsed to the ground in shame. The villagers stared at him in disbelief. Even Nkem's mother began crying softly, but the spirit was not finished. Nkem's voice slowly filled the square again. "Tonight, the truth has returned." The wind rushed across the fire and the flames roared violently. "And the debt must be paid." Silence fell over the entire village square. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Because everyone now understood something terrifying. The spirit had not come only to expose secrets. It had come to collect justice. And the one who owed the greatest debt was Nkem's father. All eyes were fixed on Obina lying on his knees in the dust. His shoulders were shaking. Sweat rolled down his face like rain. The villagers stared at him with fear and confusion. Obina had always been a quiet man. He minded his business and rarely joined village arguments. No one had ever imagined that his name would be connected to the sacred shrine. But the spirit had spoken, and when the spirit spoke, nobody questioned it. Nkem was still standing in the middle of the square. Her body looked stiff like dry wood. The fire beside the shrine burned higher now, its flames rising and falling like they were breathing. The wind moved through the trees, making the leaves whisper softly. Nkem's head slowly lifted. Her glowing eyes stared down at her father. When she spoke again, the voice was deep and heavy like thunder rolling in the distance. "Obina." The sound of his name echoed across the square. Obina lifted his head slowly, his eyes full of fear. His lips trembled, but no words came out. The spirit continued. "Years ago, you entered the shrine when the night was dark." The villagers murmured quietly. Entering the shrine at night without permission was a terrible crime. The shrine was the home of the village deity. Only the chief priest was allowed to go inside during sacred rituals. Anyone else who dared to enter risked the anger of the spirit. The voice continued slowly. "You came searching for power." Obina shook his head weakly. "No, no," he whispered, but his voice was too small to stop the truth from coming out. The spirit's voice became colder. "You stole the sacred staff that belonged to this shrine." A loud gasp spread through the crowd. The chief priest staggered backward, his eyes wide with shock. The sacred staff was the most powerful object in the shrine. It was believed to hold the blessing and protection of the village spirit. Without it, the shrine was weakened. The villagers began whispering loudly. Some people looked at Obina with anger burning in their eyes. The spirit continued. "You took the staff to a witch doctor in the forest." Obina suddenly covered his face with his hands. His body shook harder now. The voice thundered again. "You wanted wealth." The villagers looked at him with disgust. The spirit went on. "The witch doctor used the staff for dark rituals." The wind blew across the square again, making the fire roar loudly. Sparks flew into the night sky. "Because of your greed, the power of this shrine was wounded." The chief priest slowly fell to his knees. Tears filled his eyes. "That is why our prayers have been weak," he whispered. "That is why sickness and strange misfortunes have entered our village." The villagers began murmuring louder now. Some people looked terrified. Others looked angry. Nkem's voice continued, slow and powerful. You thought your crime was buried in darkness. Obina slowly removed his hands from his face. Tears rolled down his cheeks. Forgive me, he cried weakly. I was young and foolish. But the spirit did not show mercy yet. Your crime brought suffering to this village. The wind became stronger again. The fire rose higher beside the shrine. Nkem's body trembled slightly as the spirit continued speaking. That is why I came tonight. The villagers leaned forward nervously. The voice became deeper. The shrine must be restored. Everyone waited in silence. Then the spirit spoke the final words slowly. The stolen staff must return. The villagers looked at Obina. He lowered his head in shame. His voice came out weak and broken. I buried it. The crowd gasped again. The chief priest quickly looked at him. Where? Obina swallowed hard. In the forest, near the old termite hill. The chief priest immediately stood up. Several strong men stepped forward with torches. The night journey to the forest began at once. Nkem remained standing in the square, her body still controlled by the spirit. The villagers waited anxiously as the men disappeared into the darkness. Time moved slowly. The wind blew quietly through the trees. Finally, after what felt like forever, the men returned. In their hands was a long wooden staff wrapped in old cloth. The chief priest stepped forward carefully. He placed the staff on the ground before the shrine. The fire beside the shrine suddenly flared brightly. The wind rushed through the square like a powerful breath. Nkem's body shook violently. Her arms stretched outward. The spirit's voice echoed one last time. The debt is paid. The fire calmed slowly. The wind faded. Nkem's glowing eyes slowly returned to normal. Her body collapsed gently onto the ground. Her mother screamed and rushed forward, holding her tightly. After a few moments, Nkem opened her eyes. She looked confused and weak. Mother, what happened? She asked softly, but nobody answered her. The villagers were staring at Obina. He was still kneeling in the dust, his head lowered in deep shame. The chief priest stepped forward slowly. His voice was calm but firm. Your greed nearly destroyed this village. Obina began crying quietly. The priest continued, but tonight the truth has saved us. The villagers nodded slowly. That night became a story that the village would never forget.
Do good and live honestly, because hidden sins will one day be exposed. Thanks guys for watching. Please like, subscribe and comment for more interesting stories.